Well, remember last time we were all together. Welcome to everyone watching online. Remember, contact me if you have any questions or comments. Moses was up on the mountain, just waiting for the news. So today we start with Moses coming down Mount Sinai. And he tells the Israelites, okay, I was just up there and I've got some good news and I've got some bad news. The good news is I got God down to 10 commandments. But the bad news is adultery is still one of them. So I guess we really could replace adultery with any of the other commandments that we don't like at a particular time, right? Well, last week we talked about a more accurate name for this chapter, that it really shouldn't be called the 10 Commandments chapter. Rather, it should be called the Decalogue. Which is from the Greek, deca logoi. In Hebrew, this translates as the 10 words or the 10 statements or the 10 pronouncements. But no matter what we call them, we can all picture them, right? Think Charlton Heston, right? Holding these two big stone slabs on which there are words, and the words are inscribed or engraved or even chiseled into the stone. And that's a rather accurate image, some people say, because it was not unusual in the ancient world to write documents, at least important documents, on stone pillars or slabs. And then they would take these slabs and place them in a sanctuary, which was called an ark. And it's almost Simchat Torah. It's tonight, actually, when the ark is opened and the Torah is removed from the bima, and Rabbi takes it and walks around, and everybody touches it and can kiss it, which you never can do that. And then you dance. You dance and you drink. The women on one side, the men on the other. But you go up and you have a l'chaim. You drink to the crazy. Now, we don't know why there are two stones when all the commandments could have fit on one stone. But we think the movie image is probably accurate. 5 commandments on one and 5 on the other. And some sages say that the entire Decalogue was written on each of the 2 stones. So there were 2 stones, but 10 commandments on each one. So they were actually copies of one another, but we don't know for sure. But they do seem to be divided by content into 2 groups. The first group of commandments, 1 to 5, deal with the relationship between God and the individual Israelites. And the second group, 6 to 10, on the other side, deal with human relations, person to person. And those commandments in the first group all contain the words, the Lord your God. And in the second group of commandments, the Lord isn't mentioned at all. So the first group deals with the religion of Israel, while the second group deals with universal prohibitions, things that no one should ever do. And these no-nos were fairly standard back in the early days. No big differences between the Israelites and other ancient societies when it comes to these laws about killing and stealing and murdering. What is different, and this is really big, is that here in Torah, in ancient Israel, the whole thing, all 10 of these, are presented as coming directly from God, not the king or the tribal chief, not committees, not from lawyers, not from political groups. These are clearly God's rules. And another thing that I love about these verses that deal with the 10 Commandments, which we're going to read and discuss very shortly. But first, notice the document begins with the words, the Lord your God. And then it closes with the words, your neighbors, God and neighbors. So it's no wonder the rabbis like Hillel and Jesus and Paul and the gospel writers and the church fathers and many modern day scholars all agree that these are the greatest words in the Bible. And Luther wrote that. He said, those who know the 10 know the entire scriptures in all affairs and all circumstances, and they are able to counsel and help and comfort and judge and are able to make good decisions. So, for goodness sake, we should learn the Ten Commandments. Now, how many of us actually know these great words? How many of you can just rattle them off right now? Yep. You learned the Lutheran version or the Jewish version?
Well, I don't know. I learned the Catholic version.
Oh, then you're definitely not Jewish. Okay, so let me share some statistics with you. Scientific surveys show that 72% of Americans know that it was Moses, not Abraham, not Job, but Moses who led the Israelites out of Egypt and accepted the stones from God. So that's a good start. But the next question was answered correctly by only 50% of those surveyed. So see if you can answer this correctly. And you don't have to tell me if you don't want me to know your answer. In your opinion, which is not among the 10 Commandments? A, do not commit adultery. B, do not steal. C, keep the Sabbath holy. And D, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Now, which one doesn't belong? D is correct. See what good Lutherans we are. That's the golden rule, but it's not a commandment, right? But what do you think is the most common wrong answer? Most people got it wrong because they answered, what do you think? Adultery, stealing, Sabbath?
Maybe Sabbath.
Sabbath, yeah. Most people didn't know that keeping the Sabbath, especially among Christians.
I'm surprised that when they opened stores on Sunday, it wasn't a big deal. People weren't going because they were used to staying home with family. But then it's just kind of part of the
Secularized.
I mean, on the way home, I'll stop at Publix and pick up something, and I'm thinking to myself,
those poor people who have to work.
If all of us didn't go, we'd be back to Sundays that are.
There are communities that absolutely do not, in all faith traditions. Muslim.
That's a good thing.
Yeah.
Chick-fil-A that will not open on Sunday.
Right.
Well,
Hobby Lobby, yeah.
Hobby Lobby. Yeah.
They're
Not all of them are connected with the religion.
Yep. And of course, on Saturday, I mean, if you live in New York, you can shop at Jewish stores on Sunday, but they're closed on Saturday. So, most Christians don't think that keeping the Sabbath is actually a commandment. And I wonder what that has to do with our attendance here on Sunday, But how many of you can name all 10? Now, I know you said you could. Just so in a bigger class, what I would have people do is just turn to each other and go blah, 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 blah. But you think you could recite all 10 of the commandments?
Sure. I can't remember what I had for breakfast.
Yeah. But listen to this. Pew Research, very reputable company. In 2017, the survey shows that more Americans could recite the 7 ingredients of a Big Mac than could recite the 10 Commandments. Now, can you do the Big Mac?
I used to.
Oh my God, that's right. I had to look that up. 2 all beef patties, special sauce, lettuce, cheese, pickle, onions on a sesame seed bun.
No onions right now.
How can you put pickles in an hamburger? I mean, I don't know.
I like that.
So more than half of us don't know the 10 Commandments, but we know the Big Macs, right? And a majority of people say that these are the people who can't name the commandments, but these people still say all people should live by the 10 Commandments, which is very interesting. Should we? Yes. Well, we know Adam didn't, and Noah didn't, and Abraham didn't, because they couldn't, because there were no 10 Commandments back then, right? What do you think people surveyed said is the commandment most broken?
No, keeping this.
Oh my gosh, where did you grow up? That's very No,
Coveting your wife and your possessions. Covering your neighbor's
coveting
wife.
should have been, I think, yeah.
No,
But
I
it-
think it's Sunday.
No, it wasn't the Sabbath. It
day.
was actually, now this is the Jewish listing. This is Torah. Number 3, you shall not swear falsely by the name of your God. And it sounds so very serious. But seriously, I know I break this at least once an hour, right?
But you don't think of it as, quote, God when you say God. Oh, God.
Or you're putting, like, oh, I came in set first on Monday. You miss a putt, and Jesus, and you say, how could you do this to me? Or I was that close to a hole in one.
Sure, he doesn't care about golf.
He cares about me.
You
So
said,
when you
David and them didn't have the 10 Commandments?
no,
I thought
oh
Moses
no,
had them.
David did, but not Abraham, not Adam.
They came out before
Oh
Moses?
yeah, oh yes. They definitely came. That's
Okay.
Genesis.
I'm
We're
not-
all
Moses so early in the Bible. I'm thinking he comes before.
because we have that whole book
Yeah.
of Genesis. Yeah. But David, yes, definitely had and broke every one on a regular basis. But when you get exasperated, do you ever say, "Great God Almighty"? So we do
No, I
things,
usually say a dirtier word.
but you don't
I
connect.
think it if I don't say it.
That's not one I break, right there.
So Exodus 20. That's what we're going to look at today. That's our parsha for today. Exodus 20, verses 1 to 3. I am the Lord. I am your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods beside me. So these 3 verses actually contain 2 commandments, the first and the second. And there's a lot to look at here. So please notice, say the sages, that the you here is plural. Okay, all of you guys, all of you, but it's also singular. So you yourself have to listen to this along with the whole community. You shall have no other gods, and don't even think about it. And seriously, say the rabbis, even thinking about idolatry is a sin. God demands exclusive loyalty, fidelity, so be faithful. And
Kind of pagan anyway.
oh,
I mean,
it's
does
definitely
anyone
pagan.
nowadays think of some
Absolutely.
object as being
My Bible says you shall have no other gods before me, not beside me.
same difference?
Yeah,
No, I don't think it is. Because I think if you have
we're actually gonna talk about this in front of you or beside you. Yeah,
and I'm thinking it's before me, but something that you put ahead of me.
right.
But beside me is like having.
That's right. Prioritized. Yeah.
But in this Lutheran Bible, it says the Jewish first commandment is, "I am the Lord your God."
That's right.
Really, it's not a commandment.
Which it really kind of is. And let me just tell you what the rabbis say about this. God says, I brought you out of Egypt. So here God identifies as your redeemer, not your creator. And Egypt is not just a place. It's not only a geographical location. It's also a very spiritual place, a place of slavery to sin. But now that you're with me, says God, you're no longer a slave to sin. And I really wish that were true, right? But why do we sometimes run back to Egypt, right back to sinning? Because it's who we are, right? But I like this midrash of these verses. The text says, I am the Lord your God. That's the commandment, as Pam pointed out. And if I am your God, I can be who I am. But I can only be who I am if you acknowledge me, and only if you do my will, then I am Yahweh. And if you follow that circular reasoning, it comes right back to God, Yahweh the merciful. But if you do not, then I am Elohim, the dispenser of justice, and very stern justice. And maybe this is where the Old Testament got that reputation as being really judgmental. And did you notice that these verses do not deny, as you mentioned, the existence of other gods, because there are other gods out there. But for Israel, there's only one God. But still, for the Israelites, it takes a while to get from um, henotheism, which is a belief system that states, yes, 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 there are lots of gods, but my God is greater than your God, to monotheism, the idea that there are no other gods, and we are a monotheistic religion, Christianity, along with.
I also look at it with other religions. They call God by a different name. Why can't it be the same person we're talking about?
Well, we tend to think, now think Hinduism. You see a
Exactly.
million gods with a million arms, but if you talk to a Hindu, they'll say same God. Just call him a different name, but it's the same God. We are mono. A lot of people don't agree with that, but they're monotheistic. If you read the Bhagavad Gita and etc. But it's an interesting concept. The idea we are clearly monotheistic, so that the idea that there are no other gods, not ever are there any other gods, not anywhere. And notice what you don't read in this chapter, there's no mention of goddesses. They're all males. And there's lots of reasons for this, say the scholars. And it's because the lady gods were very, very popular with the Israelites' neighbors, Egypt and the Canaanites. And it was not easy for the Israelites to resist the lure of these lovely ladies, because they were all very attractive and naked little statues. So we actually have evidence, ancient inscriptions that appear to prove that the Canaanite goddesses, particularly Asherah. Have you heard Asherah, the name Asherah? Well, she was worshipped in Judah by the Israelites. And Asherah was actually worshipped in connection with Yahweh, God. The inscription found in an ancient tomb, and you can Google this, it's fascinating. It clearly mentions the two together. In fact, Asherah is called his Asherah, belonging to Yahweh. Interesting. But just so you know, in the Bible, over 40 times we can read references to the goddess Asherah. Very attractive goddess of fertility and war and all kinds of things. And I going off on a tangent here now, but I just did this with a group. What remains of Asherah in our society today is the stripper's pole. Have you ever heard of, I'm tearing down those poles that you worship? You do a lot of it in First Samuel and Second Kings. Um, People worshipped a pole as Asherah, and I don't know if you ever took a stripper's pole class. It's supposed to be very good for your abs and your gluteus and etc. But I thought what was interesting is another remnant of Asherah is said to be the Christmas tree that we put in. We put round balls on it to symbolize her symbol of fertility with her breasts, and we decorated. And I wouldn't say we worship the Christmas tree. Some people do. Don't touch, everything on there is so special. But those are remnants of ancient goddess culture.
But if you don't look at it that way, it isn't. When you stop to think about it, it's just a decorated tree.
Right? Which is what an Asherah pole is. It's a decorated tree that you decorate in honor of Asherah, the goddess of. She was like very, very close to Baal, who was a little devil. But you would love that group. But anyway, that's the love connection. Finished now. Now, the second commandment clearly shows that God demands nothing more, nothing less than complete loyalty. So, whether you believe that God is speaking only to the Israelites or that God is still speaking to us, as I do, it is clear that God is speaking his will. This is his divine will. But ask someone, is God saying the first commandment is, believe in me? When you read the first commandment, is that what you hear? Believe in me.
Yeah.
Well, some say the very first thing that God commands us to do is believe. So do you believe that?
I do. Yeah, mean,
It
I'm
encompasses
kind
a
of stuttering
lot.
over what I want to say, but it's more than just believing in him. He is God. Fact.
Fact, believe it.
Fact.
Yeah.
Yes.
So some people say no, that it's not what God is saying here. Here in the first two verses, God is simply telling us who he is. I am the Lord, your God. That's who I am. And God is not telling us what to believe, because a lot of sages say we can't be commanded to believe, right? You can only be commanded to do something or not do something. But before this can happen, before we do what God commands, we have to accept the yoke of his sovereignty, right? So for some of us, that means accepting the cross, which is the cross of Christ. For others, do you guys know the Shema, the prayer of the Shema in Deuteronomy? You are the Lord my God, and I will love you with my whole heart, my whole soul. That's the Shema. The Lord Yahweh is our God. The Lord Yahweh is one, which is why Jews have such a problem with the Trinity. And accepting that God is the source of all existence, that God is the provider of ultimate meaning. And knowing this and living like we know this, you can't do it without faith, right? And that's what this opening of this chapter starts with, I think. That's what it teaches. The Decalogue starts with an affirmation of God's reality. You're really saying to yourself, I believe God is real, and God is here and now, and God always was, and God always will be. But this comes with caveats. Verse 4 limits what you can actually do with your belief. You shall not make for yourself a sculpted image. Same thing? Or any likeness of what is in the heavens above, on the earth below, or in the waters under the earth. So those last three lines pretty much cover it all. This is a biblical world that's
But
described.
how many people have angels in their house?
But we don't worship the angel.
No, I know we don't. But
Yeah, but that's not an image of God, right?
But it's an image of something that's in heaven.
But
But it's also, I mean, but it says,
we are going to talk about that
Because
in just
after
a
I
minute.
read this, I have an angel, and then I was putting some stuff away, and there was a stocking hanger, which was an angel.
Yes, yes.
I'm thinking, okay, I don't worship them, but
but it doesn't say that you can't have those images. It just says you can't worship them.
You shall have no other gods before me. We have plenty of other gods besides angels before God.
but
Money.
Exactly.
actually, 4
Prestige.
doesn't say anything about
But if you think
worship.
worshiping, I am the
No.
Lord your God. You shall have no other gods before me. No one else can be more important than I am. You don't bow your knee to anybody but me. You don't bow your head to anybody but me. And we could go on and on about the things people, God comes first, second, and third in my life. That kind of attitude. So if we go back to Genesis, you'll see that that's what God created in the first and second chapter, heaven and earth and everything under the earth. So notice that God here, when he makes this statement, is not only the God of history who breaks through to this kingdom on earth to rescue and redeem his people, but here, in a way, God is also sort of rewriting Israel's history. He not only gets the people out of slavery, but he rules the entire cosmos. And that's huge. And that's probably why the third commandment is here, because God wants you to know that he is, I say he, but I could say she, I could say they. God is huge and too huge to be contained in a painting or a statue. So no image making of God, because God doesn't have an image. And you know who suffers with this tremendously in terms of explanation in interfaith work? Catholics. Because you walk into a Catholic church and you don't know where to turn. There's Jesus, but there's like 30 other people in long robes, around them. So, But Catholics you learn if you've ever been Catholic, you learn I'm not worshiping the Lady of Guadalupe. I'm not really worshiping Mary. Yes, I love her and I need her, and I do. I love Mary. I couldn't live without her. But do I worship Mary like I worship her son? No.
Even
It's
when you say Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee.
yes.
Yes, you're saying Hail Mary, but I learned that with the Catholics.
But it's also pray for us. You're asking
Intercession,
Mhm.
which is so Catholic, which Luther said, get it out. You don't need anybody between
Right.
you and God.
Yeah, they
Talk
like-
to him. He wants to hear your voice. Don't tell the priest what you want him. So talk a little bit about that. I'm trying not to Catholic bash on Sunday, but it's a Reformation Sunday, right?
Yeah, true.
But I'm not going to do it, of course.
But Luther didn't want not be Catholic. He wanted the Catholic Church to change, and it wouldn't.
Well, he wanted to go back to what it was
Well, he didn't want to have
before they crapped it up.
He didn't
Yeah.
want you paying money to get into heaven. I mean, that's not the way it works.
That's one of the things,
Yeah, and that's probably the
One of the
biggest thing.
One of the 95.
Five.
True.
It's all about
But
money.
that's
It
the
was
biggest
all about follow the money. Yep. But I take it up a step, I think, on Sunday. I'll be so anxious to hear what you guys have to say. So, God doesn't have an image. So, no image making of God, no shape, no form. And the commandment stresses this incorporeality. He doesn't have a body. Although, my goodness, read Genesis 1. He's walking around, looking at what he's created. Oh, nice job there with the lights. Nice job with the sea.
Maybe that's the only way they could portray.
What about you?
What do you mean? What about?
When you close your eyes and you bring God close to you, how do you see him?
I don't see.
I don't see God, I see Jesus.
Oh, you
don't
see
even-
Jesus,
I don't
which
even-
is how God revealed
Right.
himself.
That's the only
Yeah,
part,
but
part we know.
I don't even look at either one of them as an image. It's like I'm talking to someone on the phone. I can't see.
Interesting. Now, when you see Jesus, do you see God?
Yes.
Well, the Son of God, yeah. But yes, he is God.
3 in 1 person. Impossible. I'll never get it, but we'll keep trying. We'll keep trying.
Everything is a matter of faith in the
Yeah.
Bible.
Which, as Pam brought up, for Christians, this idea that God has no image completely changes with the birth of Jesus, because that's the incarnation. God actually takes on a body.
He said in Genesis, when he was making it, he made man in his image.
But are you talking
Right?
about the physical image or the spiritual image?
Yeah.
I don't know, what was he talking about? You tell me.
It
I
didn't
don't know. That's what I'm saying.
describe it
I
in the
don't
Bible.
know.
Yeah, they showed an
Right.
Arab face on Facebook one day. I said, would you be afraid if you saw this face?
It's
And then they
Jesus.
said, this could be Jesus' face.
That's right.
which is
Semitic.
very
He's
true.
a Semite. Yeah. Interesting. Well, have we all worshipped idols? Yeah, probably, right?
Probably
We
at some
continue to turn our direction to other things other than God. We turn it usually right back to ourselves first. And then we turn to lots of other things, right? Which is Luther's definition of sinning, which is turning away from God. Remember, this is how we're supposed to be moving toward God, but when we sin, we shift away and turn to ourselves. So listen to this ancient midrash by a rabbi, and it sounds so Lutheran. It sounds just like justification by faith alone, which is perfect timing for Reformation. So justification by faith, not good works. So rabbis say, never make God's laws, like mitzvot, there are 613 of them, never make those commandments into idols. Don't ever think that God gives you credit for doing what he's commanded you to do. Rather, it is the faith in the devotion that you do God's work and keep God's commandments. That faith is what credits you as righteous. And that faith allows us to see God while at the same time know that we can't see God. Because you get so close, that you can feel him, your face. But God is invisible. But we see God, right?
I see you can see God through people. Some people are just, they're godly.
Charismatic. Luther sure was, yeah. So do you see God having arms and legs? Does he have a beard, do
I
you
don't
think?
know, he's still on the phone.
And do you think he's male or female?
No.
Do you think he's black or white?
Oh, geez.
I don't
I don't think
Does it
like
matter?
that.
Doesn't
about
matter.
the color necessarily, but because of the images that I had from childhood, I have always seen him as my father, not my
Yeah, we call him father, don't we?
not my physical father, but as a father is a man, and that's the way I think
That's
of it.
true.
But I don't necessarily believe that he is a man because I
Mhm.
believe he is a spirit. He doesn't really have a body that I would recognize walking down the street.
But he could have.
He could have.
In a flash, yeah.
And
He
that
could
person walking down the street, maybe,
He
you
could
don't
have,
know.
but I don't. I try not to imagine him that way because I do think of him as a spirit that has three persons in that spirit.
So when you say spirit, are you referring to the Holy Spirit?
The Holy Spirit, Jesus, and the Father. I think of that as one spirit, but we recognize them as in three persons. But it's still the same one.
So like
being.
like your dolls, the three-headed dolls that you brought.
Three-headed
I
dog.
don't. I don't.
Your three-headed dolls that you brought for the sale.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
the ones-
Oh, yeah.
Three-head, yeah.
We brought those from church.
They were throwing those out at church, but they're worth $100 and some. And I said, well, we can get 5 for them.
So you did bring them.
I
Oh,
brought
good.
them. Yeah,
Oh,
they're
good. Oh,
here.
good. So here's something rabbis say, and think about this for a second. We are forbidden to make an image of God because we are the image of God. So we should see God in each other. But be careful with that
Sometimes
too.
that's difficult.
Yeah, that's where,
Oh, yeah.
that's where Scientology
Sometimes
came
it's
in.
the other guy.
Yeah.
Scientology teaches that each one of us is God.
Yeah.
So that's get a lot of trouble.
I don't know.
So the idea that I am created in the image of God, you have to be careful because it's easy to get stuck there. And God sends us this commandment, say some of the rabbis, to remind us, don't make yourself into an idol and come to believe that you're God, which is what you just said, right? And how often have we heard someone say, who do you think you are? God's gift to humanity, right? So, but having a good self-image is very important. But thinking you're God, not a good idea. Now, the next verses explain the dangers and what happens if you do fall into the trap of seeing yourself or others as God rather than created in the image of God. And it's tricky, but God commands, you shall not bow to them or serve them, for I, the Lord, your God, I am an impassioned God, visiting the guilt upon the children, upon the third and fourth generations of those who reject me, but showing kindness to the 1,000th generation of those who love me and keep my commandments. Now, do you find that frightening or reassuring?
Oh,
Yeah. So maybe this is why we study the Old Testament. You know, we don't find this everywhere. Now, in your text, the Bible that you're studying, how does God describe himself in your Bible? Does God say, I'm a jealous God? Or does he say zealous?
Jealous.
Jealous. So we're pretty sure I am your God. That's there, right?
Yeah,
But
I
you
am
don't
the
have
Lord your
written, I am your God, and I am a bloodthirsty, pathetic stalker who will follow you through time to punish you and your innocent children. Is that written anywhere in your
God. The third and
Bible?
fourth generation.
Yeah,
Yeah, I said it will punish.
But many people think, there's that darn Old Testament God again, right? Thank goodness that's not our God. And the image of a different God came about because of a bad translation. And when we read carefully, we discover that God is merciful, literally full of mercy and compassion and kindness and grace. God is full of grace. But just look at these verses. The love of God outlasts the judgment of God. 2 to 3 generations versus 1,000 generations. So threats of God's punishments are taken over by assurances of God's promise keeping and abiding love. God loves us so much, too much, to allow us to worship idols. So don't make idols, and especially don't worship idols. Very clear taboo. And God says this a lot throughout the whole Bible. Don't worship idols, or your life will be difficult, and you'll be very sad if you do. And have you ever wondered why God couldn't have made this easier for us when He said, don't worship idols? Instead of just saying this commandment, why didn't God just simply smash all the idols, destroy them, so we're not tempted to worship them? God destroys them so they don't tempt us. Case
Now,
closed.
who was the first person that said, okay, this is a horse or a whatever, we're going to worship it? Wouldn't you look at him and say, what?
Well, it depends on where you were.
Yeah.
It depends on where you were and what you were told to worship. And not
Statues aren't the
only
idols, though.
not
No,
only
I
would
get
you
rid of
whatever
all
it
the
might be.
statues. Yeah, you can get rid of all the statues. You still worship money or work or.
Oh, yeah, really.
Yeah.
or
That's
the god of fire, Molech. I mean, Israelites put their kids on that altar and burned them up to the god. I mean, we do in.
How could anyone-
Look at
I
Abraham,
don't
our
even know how God
patriarch.
put his own son on the cross. I just
Well,
don't-
how do you think
I couldn't do
Abraham
it.
dragged
Yeah.
Isaac, Yitzchak, all the
I
way up to
know.
Moriah? I mean,
That's really
over
pushing your.
and over and over again we do it. And some people call it the leap of faith. I'm going to believe if God tells me to do it, I'm going to do it because He'll stop me at the last minute. Very tough stuff. This is very tough stuff. But here's what the rabbis say, and I love Rabbi Gamliel. He writes this midrash to explain why God didn't destroy all the idols. Rabbi reminds us there are men and women in God's kingdom on earth who worship the sun. Some people worship the moon. Some people worship planets. Some men and women even worship other men and women, right? So what? You want that God should destroy them and annihilate all of them? Of course not. So what Rabbi said makes sense. Just because some people do it doesn't mean that God should destroy them. But God is talking about punishing children for something they didn't even do, for something their parents did. I don't like that part about God, right?
That doesn't seem fair.
No, it doesn't sound like my God.
I mean, there are kids that are putting in orphanages, and the parents are terrible.
Terrible.
And
Go in the system. What's
they were adopted
worse?
by a nice family and turn out to be
Chances are
beautiful
that
people.
chances are that's not going to happen. Chances are they're going to go in the system and be housed by abusers who will habitually abuse those children, and they will grow. And that's statistically the case. But let's stop for a second and think about reality. And it might be harsh, but in real life, rabbis, ancient and modern, stress when parents, as you were saying, do a really bad job of raising their kids, it can take a really long time to straighten out family problems. That's why they're talking about generations. And all too often, kids who are abused grow up to be abusers. And it happens generation.
One would think they'd be the opposite. Totally.
Sometimes, but chances are no, you are what you learn, right?
But I always look at it that there are consequences for whatever behavior you have. So if the parent has bad behavior toward their children, whether or some physical ailment, it does pass down through the generations, and it takes, as you said, it takes a while for that to work its way through. But that's not.
I agree.
But that's not.
That's that poor kid that was born in that family. He didn't have a chance.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. And you're part of that chance. And so are you. And so am I. Because what the rabbis and the church fathers tell us is that in these verses, God is telling us that society is collectively responsible for its children and the individual. So, yes, you're responsible for your own behavior, that affects the life of the community. So conduct has an effect on succeeding generations, whether we like it or not, good conduct or bad conduct. So in the world then, and in our world today, where a child is born, and to whom that child is born really, really matters. The baby's zip code will decide almost everything for that baby. And yes, we are all children of God, so in that sense, we all have the same father and mother. However, good parenting and bad parenting by our human parents have a serious impact on the health of the children. And so, say the sages and the social workers, God is not describing a punishment here, he's simply stating a fact. So if you're born into a poor African community, very good chance your baby's going to die of diarrhea. That's my baby was dying of diarrhea before we got her out of that country. Just couldn't keep anything in. And there are remedies, but it wasn't available there. We had to get her. So, point is, don't make images of God. Instead, imagine God, right? As a provider, as a redeemer. And our next verse makes that move. We go from images of God to names of God, so that we move from the visual to the verbal. So listen, you shall not swear falsely by the name of the Lord your God, for the Lord will not clear one who swears falsely by his name. Does that sound right in your Bible?
Yeah.
Mine says, you shall not misuse the name of the Lord your God, and the Lord will not hold anyone guiltless who misuses his name. That sounds very
Wow,
different
is that like an American Bible? What is
That's
it?
NIV.
That's it. No, it's the
New
new
International Version.
reserve.
Oh, I know. Okay, I got it.
New revised.
Interesting.
I'll tell you,
That
it's
is
similar,
the Lutheran
but
Bible,
it's
though. The New
so many
Revised.
different
Did anyone ever hear this commandment as, "Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord in vain"?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's how I remembered it as a kid.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what it
Does anybody's Bible say that?
No.
Well, it gives you the Jewish, the Lutheran, and the Reformed or whatever, and two of them are saved.
Yeah, yeah. So
I am a jealous God.
Oh, jealous.
Yeah, the
now,
children.
usually this commandment is understood to include using God's name in the service of sorcery. Don't do any magic, curses, spells. I put a spell on you in God's name. I never thought about that, but not imagining it. It's a commandment against don't do magic. But how many of you see this commandment as a prohibition about swearing or cursing? No potty mouths. Oh, really?
Did.
Yeah.
I always
Yeah.
did.
Well, I don't know about you. Sometimes on Facebook, someone's got something worthwhile to say, and every other word is a swear word. So I don't listen to the rest of it.
That's right.
They've lost me.
So
Because
close
their
my
language
ears.
is offensive.
Yep.
I mean,
Now, God doesn't like potty mouths, but rabbis say there's more to this than just colorful cursing. In fact, sages say that this commandment may be the most important of the 10. Prohibiting swearing and curses is actually more important than prohibiting murder or stealing. Now, do you think that? No. Well, here's what the rabbis say. Murder and stealing are crimes. They're sins of opportunity. Something presents itself and you react. Ooh, I want that, out of greed or out of fear. So you take what is not yours, like taking a life, right? But cursing is different. It quickly goes from a reaction, ow, I just burned myself, son of a blah, 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 and it becomes a habit. So using bad language, using God's good name in a bad way becomes part of your everyday vocabulary, which is what you described. And that devalues
what you're saying.
the awe and the respect that God deserves and that you deserve at being made in the image. So your kids will hear you, and then cursing and swearing will become a habit for them too. And then all of society will be affected. Do you ever talk to a little kid and every other word out of his mouth is the F word or the... It's terrifying.
So far,
Um,
no.
disrespect. And do you ever get the feeling that we live in a disrespectful
Yes.
world?
Yes. People are rude. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, Jewish tradition took this commandment very seriously. Forget about the name in vain part. More serious than that. Some Jewish tradition frowned on any secular or self serving use of the Lord's name. Like in everyday life, people don't say it and they don't write it. And the name of God is too holy to be used in everyday life. And you know these communities, right? If you know that in some communities, or did you know that any parchment, and I was just yelling at Aiden over at Emmanuel Tuesday, because they just threw out a stack of Bibles because they got wet in the hurricane. So they threw them out. Not in the Jewish community, never going to happen. They have to be buried. Re, you know,
I thought maybe
they
burned.
can't be trashed. They can't be burned. They can't go in the shredder. The document has to be formally buried in holy ground because the name of God is so sacred. Now, have you ever seen, if you're reading any Jewish newspaper or something like Yiddish or Hasidic, you'll see the name of God, G with a dash and then D, like the O isn't there because you probably don't read a lot of Yiddish newspapers, but yeah, not used. Not used. God's name is too holy to just use it all over the secular place, right? And it seems kind of extreme, but how many of us can be heard throughout the day saying things like, and these are the nice things, oh, dear God, or great God Almighty, or dear Lord. And these expressions are expressly forbidden by this commandment.
But it's also like whatever the situation is, it's frustrating. It's like you're calling on God for help. I mean, it can go both ways.
That's,
I
I
mean, how
think
did
that,
you
yeah,
mean it?
I absolutely see your point there.
Yeah.
That's not usually what I say. I usually say, Jesus, and now
Like saying,
some communities of faith, and you know who they are, um, expanded this commandment to include oath taking. Raise your right hand. Put your hand on the Bible and swear exactly. Tell the truth. Not permitted in some communities.
I will affirm, but I will not
Yes,
swear.
right. You can't, but it's more than just I won't lie under oath. But that doesn't cut it for Quakers, the Society of Friends. They will not swear an oath. Same for other Christians who, and we read it in James not too long ago, in the letter of James. Don't swear an oath. You either affirm yes or deny no, or you say nothing at all, which reminds me of a few of the teenagers that I taught over the years in confirmation. When I would begin the study of the commandments, I would ask them, can anyone name the first commandment? And I could always tell who was going to be the one who, ooh, I can, Miss Donna, I can. And I say, all right, go ahead, Luke. And he said, you have the right to be silent. And that's what he believed. And everybody laughed, and we thought, maybe this kid has actually read the Epistle of James. Don't swear, just keep your mouth shut, right? And for sure, this commandment is about the divine name. It's the prohibition of using the divine name. And that goes for issues like perjury, lying and swearing by the name of God, that you're not lying. So don't ever use God's name to make your lies more believable. Of course, we'd never accuse ourselves of that. And the prohibition also goes for the frivolous and unnecessary use of God's name. And abracadabra is in the Bible. Did you know that? Yep, it certainly is. Sorcery and fortune telling. And now, at the risk of violating the third commandment, I'm going to do a little bit of fortune telling because we're not going to be able to cover both tablets. We're not even going to be able to cover one tablet. We probably shouldn't go too far ahead when we have less people. But we don't have to discuss all of the Decalogue today, right? These verses are very rich, very savory, and we shouldn't just whiff them down without chewing. Take our time. So let's stop here for a second. We have 8 minutes left and share. comments and concerns about the text and about our stories. Most of us have spent our whole lives learning these commandments. Now, today, your concept of the Ten Commandments clearly have grown and changed over the years, right? You think?
Yeah, I think that for me, they've become more, they've expanded what I believe the spirit of the commandment is than when I was a kid.
More understanding. Comes with wisdom and age.
It's like thou shalt not kill. To me, it's not just about actually physically killing somebody. It's about
It doesn't say thou shalt not kill.
what does it say?
Thou shalt not murder.
Well, thou
And
shalt
mine says kill.
It says kill?
Or it says kill
Thou shalt
too.
not
Yeah, that's what I thou shalt not kill.
Killing was allowed. Oh my God, they stoned on a regular basis. They
It says Roman Catholic and Lutheran should say you shall not murder.
Exactly.
But
We don't believe that. Yeah.
Protestants and
Same
Jewish say
difference.
kill.
I know.
As a child, I learned thou shalt not kill. I didn't learn thou shalt not murder. And that was in the Catholic school. But what I'm saying is, it's not, for me, it's not just about what you physically do to someone. It is also what you spiritually and emotionally do to someone. If your words
Oh, worse. Yeah.
or your words are so unkind that they hurt someone to their soul, you have killed something in them. And so to me, that expands the meaning of that commandment.
Which sounds like you agree with the fact that the commandments are truly the greatest advancement in the moral thinking of all of mankind, right? And there's a whole other set of 10 commandments when we get to Deuteronomy. We'll see that. And differ a little bit in language, not a lot, but mostly they differ over the fourth commandment, which is where we're going to start next week. We're going to read Exodus 20, verses 7 to 12, because these are the verses that deal with two commandments, the fourth and the fifth. So do you remember these two?
Thou shalt honor the mother and father.
Exactly. So lots and lots. Lots and lots to talk about, and here's some questions. What do these commandments require that we give to God, the ones we talked about today? And do you ever sin against the commandments that you promise? Well, actually, how do you promise to obey or not obey the commandments? How do you make the commitment? At your baptism, at your confirmation, when you go to the altar, when you go to the table to take Christ?
Don't we do that every Sunday when we have our confession?
Oh, confession, that you've broken them. But when you break the commandments, you're thinking the 10. When you offer that we have sinned against, are you thinking the 10?
Word and deed.
For me, I think it's always part of it. The first commandment, so how I have acted as far as my relationship with God, and the rest of them are about how I've acted in my relationships with other people.
Yeah, which are the two greatest commandments, yeah. And our new motto.
It's true. In the Catholic faith, when you went to confession, it was "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned," and then you list the sins, and usually they were against the Ten Commandments, one of the commandments that were out there.
Yeah, did you ever read the book of Sunday school? Well, actually, they're Catholic school teachers who have to hear the little one's confession for the first time. Yep, and I worship false idols, and I did this, and I did that, and blah, 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 blah. And my best friend's mom was a Catholic school teacher, and she actually fell asleep in the confessional listening to this little boy. And, oh, God.
I've never heard of anybody but the priest hearing a confession.
And were you close to your priests in your church? You weren't raised Catholic?
Oh yeah, I was.
Oh, you.
Catholic. I became a Catholic after I got married. So I was 24 until I was 24. I was Catholic.
Oh, see, if you grew up in a church where the priest knew you, knew your whole family, you would like wait until a confessional, somebody you didn't know went in, and go to that guy, because otherwise Father Murphy would say, Donna, or.
My hometown was just slightly bigger than my dorm when I went to Indiana University. I mean, it was a little. My church was not very big, and we'd had the same priest there for, I don't know, at least 25 years. So he knew everybody.
He knew your sins
He knew
before
your
you told
voice.
him.
I mean, everything.
Oh yeah, they definitely knew your voice. But I always had an issue with that, being raised a Lutheran and then converting to Catholicism and becoming a
Oh,
Catholic.
that's so interesting.
It-
I thought it was the opposite.
No, I was raised Lutheran until I met my first wife and we got married, and we decided that the son was going to both churches, and that was kind of, and she was going to both churches. So I said, Catholics are fairly similar, so I'll convert. But then when they started telling me all the things that I had to swear I was going to do and go to a priest to confess, I looked at my wife and says, I don't go to a priest to confess. I confess directly to God. I don't want this intermediary. I never liked that. So I kind of refused to go to confession. I had to go initially because that was part of the requirement to sign up and all the rules of becoming a Catholic.
But did you ever take communion in the Catholic Church without confession?
Without confession, yes.
Well, then you're doomed.
I
Okay.
know.
Well,
Well,
actually,
the fact that I was a Lutheran, I was doomed.
Right.
Initially.
Right.
it depends on the priest, because the priest at St. John's, where John went to school, the Catholic
Uh-huh.
school, my husband was Catholic. Then he was divorced, married me, so he became Lutheran because he couldn't be a Catholic. And we asked if we could take communion, that we weren't Catholic. And we said, well, what are you? And we said, Lutheran. See, you're perfectly welcome at our table.
It depended
What
upon the
what
priest.
year was
Depends
that?
on the church.
Depends
Well,
upon the
John's
priest. Not all of them are that way.
53 now. He must have been, I don't know,
No.
16, 17.
Do you know it is still the law? I don't know what they call it now. It's canon law. There's no doubt about it. I just had a big conversation with Monsignor Dubois over at Epiphany. It's still stated, not that Catholic priests teach this, but there is no salvation outside of the Catholic Church. We are doomed unless we automatically convert at our death.
But
They
who
tried to
said
loosen
that?
up on
Man, or did God say that?
It's part of their canon law. It's part of the laws that were
So
I don't know,
man
written
said,
and unwritten, but it's
Voted on,
voted on, yeah. It's all part of
counseled,
the
and
ecumenical councils, I think they call. I forget exactly what they call
it's
them.
like a
And they've tried to
government.
modify that. They've tried to loosen a lot of their requirements.
oh, they're
Well,
trying.
They've changed
Yeah.
a lot.
Absolutely.
There's no question they've changed
Because-
a whole lot in the years when I was a kid and my friends were Catholic. Of course, I was Baptist, so I was even more strict. And I hated it.
Stuff.
Yeah.
You know, it's
I
funny
told my
when
mother, I'm not going anymore. And
I
she
was
said,
walking
"Okay."
Lucy this morning, and this woman said, "Oh, I would love to come to your Isaiah class, but I have, what is it called? FBS? FSB.